It was supposed to be a routine business trip, the kind that left Elsie Carter feeling assured that her life, though not perfect, was steady. But the moment she stepped off the plane and arrived home earlier than expected, she unknowingly plunged into a nightmare that would redefine her world. Standing frozen in the shadows of her office, Elsie's trembling fingers gripped the cold edge of the glass partition. She wasn't prepared for the scene before her. A scene so vulgar, so raw, it threatened to shatter every piece of her carefully constructed life. Her husband, Daniel, the man she had built her life around, and Esme, the assistant she had trusted implicitly, were locked in a heated, unapologetic act of betrayal on her very desk. The words, sharp and cruel, sliced through her like shards of glass. "It's her money that's keeping me," Daniel's voice echoed in her mind long after the words left his lips. "You know it's you I love." Elsie stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. But she didn't scream. She didn't confront them. Instead, she turned and fled into the night, the weight of her shattered heart dragging her. Elsie spent the night at a hotel, her thoughts spiraling into chaos as the events replayed in her mind. Each laugh they shared, each stolen glance, every deceitful word, it all fell into place. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't cry. Instead, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights, her heart numb with disbelief. By morning, numbness gave way to rage. How could they betray her so completely? How could Daniel, the man she once believed loved her, reduce her to nothing more than a bank account? And Esme, the woman she had mentored, trusted, how could she stoop so low? Elsie called her lawyer the first chance she got. "I want a divorce. No negotiations. Find everything you can to ruin him financially," she said, her voice steady, devoid of emotion. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Understood." But Elsie didn't stop there. She needed to leave her company, a place she had worked tirelessly to build, but now felt tainted by Esme's presence. A plan began to form, bold, daring, and utterly risky. She reached out to Albie Royce, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Albie was her rival in every sense. His company had often clashed with hers, and his arrogance grated on her nerves. But she also knew he was the best in the business. If anyone could help her reclaim her power and rebuild her life, it was him. When she stepped into his sleek, glass-walled office, Albie greeted her with a smirk. "Elsie Carter," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you've come to surrender." "I'm here to make a deal," Elsie shot back, her voice firm. "A deal? With me?" His eyes sparkled with intrigue. This should be interesting. Over the next few weeks, Elsie threw herself into her new role at Albie's company. The work was intense, the pressure relentless, but she thrived on it. It was a welcome distraction from the mess Daniel and Esme had left behind. But Albie wasn't just her boss, he was a constant presence, his charm both infuriating and intoxicating. He challenged her, teased her, and somehow always managed to be exactly where she needed him. One evening, as they worked late, Albie leaned against her desk, watching her with a sly grin. "You know," he said, "I've always admired your fire, even when you were trying to beat me." "Admiration wasn't exactly the vibe I got from you," Elsie replied, not looking up from her laptop. "Maybe I hit it well," he said, his voice softer now. Elsie glanced up, her heart skipping a beat at the intensity in his gaze. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, really seen. But the moment passed as quickly as it came, and Elsie reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't about Albie. This was about her. The tension between Elsie and Albie became a quiet storm that brewed beneath the surface of their every interaction. Albie's playful banter grew sharper, more personal, while Elsie's composed retorts carried an edge that only seemed to fuel his interest. Late nights in the office became the norm. They worked side by side, their conversations shifting from professional strategies to personal glimpses of their lives. Albie revealed a side of himself that Elsie hadn't expected, a man with depth, ambition, and scars of his own. One evening, as Elsie sat reviewing a contract, Albie appeared in the doorway of her office, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "You've been staring at that document for hours," he said, stepping inside. "Take a break. You'll thank me later." Elsie sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't have time for breaks, Albie." "Humor me," he insisted, setting the glass in front of her. "Even you need to breathe once in a while." She hesitated, but eventually picked up the glass. As they clinked their glasses, their fingers brushed, and the jolt of electricity that shot through her was undeniable. To new beginnings, Albie said, his eyes never leaving hers. To second chances, Elsie replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But Elsie couldn't ignore the battle raging within her. Every time Albie leaned too close or let his gaze linger too long, she felt her resolve weakening. He was magnetic in a way she hadn't expected, and that terrified her. One night, as they walked out of the office together, Albie offered to drive her home. The air was cool, the streets quiet, and the silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. When they reached her building, Elsie turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. The way Albie was looking at her, with a mixture of tenderness and hunger, made her heart race. "Elsie," he said, his voice low and steady, "I know you're rebuilding, finding your footing, but I need you to know something." She swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. "What's that?" "I'm not your rival anymore," he said, his hand brushing hers. "I'm on your side. Always." For a moment she couldn't breathe. The sincerity in his voice, the warmth in his eyes, it was too much, too soon. She stepped back, shaking her head. "Albie, I can't," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't let myself fall for someone right now. Not after everything." He nodded, stepping back but not looking away. "I'll wait," he said simply. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." As the weeks passed, Elsie found herself struggling to keep her distance. Albie's presence was a constant reminder that life could be more than betrayal and pain. But trusting someone again, letting someone in, that was a leap she wasn't sure she could take. Until one night, when she found herself standing outside his office, her heart pounding. Albie looked up from his desk, his surprise quickly replaced by a slow, knowing smile. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, gesturing for her to come in. "I need to know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? Why now?" Albie stood, crossing the room to stand before her. "Because you're extraordinary, Elsie, and I can't stand the thought of you going through this alone." She looked up at him, her walls crumbling with every word he spoke. Before she could second-guess herself, she closed the distance between them, her lips brushing his in a kiss that was equal parts tentative and desperate. And in that moment, Elsie realized that maybe, just maybe, letting go wasn't the same as giving up. That kiss changed everything. For days afterward, Elsie avoided Albie. She buried herself in work, pushing her emotions aside and pretending that moment of vulnerability hadn't happened. But Albie wasn't one to be ignored. One evening, he cornered her in the elevator after a late meeting. The air was thick with tension as the doors closed, sealing them in. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low but firm. Elsie crossed her arms, keeping her eyes on the elevator panel. "I've been busy." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You kissed me, Elsie. That wasn't nothing. Don't pretend it was." Her head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing. "What do you want me to say, Albie? That I'm terrified? That I don't trust myself anymore? Because I am, and I don't." Albie reached out, gently cupping her face. "Then let me show you that you can. I'm not him, Elsie. I'll never hurt you like that." The elevator doors dinged open, but neither of them moved. Their gazes locked, the unspoken tension between them crackling like a live wire. "This isn't fair," Elsie whispered, her voice breaking. "Life rarely is," Albie replied. "But you deserve something real, and I'm willing to fight for that, for you." Before she could respond, the elevator doors started to close again. Albie stepped back, letting her walk out, his words lingering in the air like a promise. But Albie wasn't the only one paying attention to Elsie. Strange things started happening at work. Elsie's desk was rifled through, her personal files tampered with. One evening, as she was leaving the office, she noticed a black car parked across the street. It didn't move, even after she drove away. When she told Albie, his expression darkened. "You think it's Daniel?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I don't know," Elsie admitted, "but it's unsettling." Albie's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it. From now on, you're not leaving the office alone." Elsie wanted to argue, but the fear gnawing at her wouldn't let her. The next night, as Elsie was leaving late, Albie was waiting for her in the lobby. "I'll walk you to your car," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. They stepped into the parking lot, the cool night air wrapping around them, but as they approached her car, a shadow moved in the corner of her eye. "Did you see that?" Elsie whispered, gripping Albie's arm. He nodded, his posture tense. Stay behind me. Before they could react, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Daniel. His once polished demeanor was replaced by something darker, desperate, unhinged. Elsie, he said, his voice a mixture of anger and pleading. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about, Elsie said, stepping back. Daniel's eyes flicked to Albie, his face twisting with fury. So this is why you're leaving me? For him? Albie stepped forward, his expression cold. She's leaving you because you're a lying, cheating bastard, and if you come near her again, you'll regret it. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you can protect her? You have no idea what you're getting into. Before anyone could respond, Daniel turned and walked away, his threat hanging in the air like a storm. That night, Elsie couldn't sleep. Albie stayed with her, his presence both comforting and electrifying. As they sat on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, he spoke softly. I'm not going to let him hurt you, he promised. What if he already has? Elsie whispered, her voice trembling. Albie tilted her face toward him, his eyes searching hers. Then we'll fight him together. You're not alone in this, Elsie. Not anymore. For the first time in weeks, Elsie felt a spark of hope. But deep down, she knew the storm was far from over. The days that followed were a blur of tension and unease. Albie assigned a private security detail to Elsie, a precaution she begrudgingly accepted. But the unease wasn't just about Daniel's threats. It was also about the feelings simmering between her and Albie, feelings she could no longer ignore. One evening, as Elsie worked late, the office lights flickered. She froze, her fingers pausing mid-typing. The building was eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by a suffocating silence. Suddenly, her office phone buzzed. The caller ID was blocked. She hesitated but picked it up. Hello? A distorted voice crackled through the line. You think you're safe, Elsie? You're not. You've made powerful enemies. Her blood ran cold. Who is this? She demanded. The line went dead. Albie arrived minutes later, having received a frantic call from Elsie. He found her pacing her office, her face pale, her hands trembling. Elsie, he said, rushing to her side. What happened? She relayed the phone call, her voice shaking with every word. Albie's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. That's it, he said, pulling out his phone. I'm doubling security, and until we figure out who's behind this, you're staying with me. Albie, I can't just— Yes, you can, he cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'm not taking any chances with your safety. That night, Elsie found herself in Albie's penthouse, a sprawling space that reflected his sharp, enigmatic personality. The view of the city lights was breathtaking, but Elsie couldn't shake the tension coiling in her chest. Albie handed her a glass of wine, his eyes scanning her face. Talk to me, he said gently. Elsie hesitated. I don't know what to do, Albie. Every step I take feels like walking into quicksand. And now Daniel, he's unpredictable, dangerous. And you're not alone in dealing with him, Albie said firmly. You've got me. Whatever it takes, we'll bring him down. She looked at him, her defenses crumbling. Why do you care so much, Albie? I'm just another person you've crossed paths with. He leaned closer, his gaze intense. You're not just anyone, Elsie. You never were. But their moment was cut short when Albie's phone buzzed. He answered, his expression shifting from calm to alarmed in seconds. What do you mean the cameras were disabled? He barked into the phone. Elsie's heart sank. What's happening? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Albie ended the call and turned to her, his face grim. Someone breached the security at your office. They've taken files, personal files. Elsie's mind raced. Daniel, she murmured. It has to be him. Albie nodded. He's trying to corner you, but we're going to beat him at his own game. The next day, Elsie and Albie met with his team of investigators. The plan was bold: track Daniel's movements, expose his financial misdeeds, and cut off his leverage. But as they delved deeper, they uncovered something shocking. Daniel wasn't working alone. He was part of a larger scheme involving shady business dealings and even blackmail. This isn't just about you, Albie said, his voice heavy. Daniel's been using your name to cover his tracks. If we don't act fast, he could take you down with him. Elsie's stomach churned. What do we do? We fight fire with fire, Albie said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. But this won't be easy. Are you ready? She met his gaze, her fear giving way to determination. Let's do it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning and strategy. Albie and Elsie worked side by side, their connection growing stronger with every battle they faced together. But the closer they got to taking Daniel down, the higher the stakes became. One night, as they reviewed their final plan, Albie placed a hand on Elsie's shoulder. "You've been incredible through all this," he said softly. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Elsie turned to him, her heart full of emotions she couldn't put into words. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Albie." He leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. "You're stronger than you know, Elsie, and I'm here for as long as you'll have me." Before she could respond, the sound of glass shattering upstairs jolted them both. "Stay here," Albie commanded, grabbing a weapon from his desk. But Elsie wasn't about to sit idle. As the suspense mounted, they moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, their hearts pounding. The shattering glass had turned the penthouse into a battlefield of shadows and whispers. Albie and Elsie moved silently, every step calculated, every breath held. The upper floor, normally an oasis of luxury, now felt like the setting of a nightmare. "Stay close," Albie whispered, his hand brushing against Elsie's as he led the way. They reached the broken window in his study. Shards of glass glittered on the polished floor like tiny daggers. The cold night air rushed in, chilling Elsie to her core. Albie scanned the room, his sharp eyes darting to every corner. "Whoever it was, they're gone now," he muttered. But Elsie wasn't convinced. A strange feeling crept up her spine, like they were being watched. "Albie," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't think we're alone." As if on cue, a shadow shifted near the far wall. Albie turned swiftly, his weapon raised. "Show yourself," he barked, his voice commanding. A man stepped out of the shadows, his face partially obscured by a mask. He was tall and imposing, his presence radiating danger. "You're meddling in things you don't understand," the intruder said, his voice deep and menacing. Albie's grip on his weapon tightened. "Who sent you? Daniel?" The man tilted his head, his silence speaking volumes. "What do you want?" Elsie demanded, stepping forward despite Albie's warning glare. The man's eyes flicked to her, a sinister smile tugging at his lips. "This isn't over, Mrs. Thorne. Consider this a warning." Before Albie could react, the intruder threw something to the ground. Smoke erupted, filling the room and stinging their eyes. By the time it cleared, he was gone. The encounter left Elsie shaken, but Albie's fury was palpable. He immediately called his security team, ordering a full lockdown of the building. "This isn't just about Daniel anymore," Albie said, pacing the room. "He's working with people who are far more dangerous than we anticipated." Elsie sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling. "What if they come after me again? What if?" Albie knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I won't let anything happen to you, Elsie. Do you hear me? We'll end this. Together." The next few days were a whirlwind of revelations. Albie's team uncovered a web of corruption that Daniel had woven over the years. Fraud, embezzlement, and even ties to criminal organizations. It was more than Elsie could have imagined. "He's been using your name to cover his tracks," Albie explained. "Your signature is on documents you never signed. If we don't stop him, he could drag you down with him." Elsie's resolve hardened. "Then we fight back. No more hiding, no more running." As they closed in on Daniel, the tension between Elsie and Albie grew unbearable. Their stolen glances, lingering touches, and late-night conversations were charged with unspoken emotions. One night, as they reviewed their final plan, Albie leaned closer to Elsie. His voice softened, his usual edge replaced by vulnerability. "You know I care about you, Elsie, more than I should." She looked at him, her walls crumbling. "Albie, I don't know how to feel anymore. You've been my anchor in all this, but I'm scared." "Of what?" he asked, his hand brushing against hers. "Of losing myself again," she admitted. Albie's gaze was intense, unwavering. "You're not losing yourself, Elsie. You're finding who you were always meant to be. And I'll be here, every step of the way, if you'll let me." The moment hung between them, fragile and electric. But before either of them could say more, Albie's phone buzzed. "It's time," he said, his voice hardening. "We've got him." Their plan was set in motion. They leaked critical evidence of Daniel's crimes to the authorities and prepared for a final confrontation. But Daniel, cunning as ever, wasn't going down without a fight. The night of the takedown, Elsie received a chilling text. "You think you've won, but you've only just begun to lose. She showed it to Albie, her face pale. What does he mean? It's a bluff, Albie said, but even he seemed unsure. They arrived at Daniel's secluded hideout, the tension suffocating. The authorities were already in position, but as Elsie and Albie approached, the sound of a gunshot shattered the night. The gunshot echoed through the night, freezing Elsie and Albie in their tracks. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind. Stay behind me, Albie whispered, pulling Elsie closer as they edged toward the hideout. His hand brushed hers, lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Inside, chaos reigned. The authorities swarmed the building, but Daniel was nowhere to be found. Instead, they found Esme, her wrists bound to a chair, a mixture of fear and fury etched on her face. "Help me," she screamed. "He's lost it. He's going to kill her." Elsie's blood turned to ice. Kill who? The woman he's been seeing. He blames her for everything. He's gone mad. Elsie's heart raced as the pieces clicked into place. Daniel wasn't just running, he was spiraling into a dark, dangerous place. "He's trying to bait us," Albie said, his jaw tight. "But we're not playing his game." "We have to find him," Elsie insisted, her voice trembling. "Before he does something we can't undo." The search led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension as they entered, the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. "This feels like a trap," Albie muttered, his hand brushing against the small of Elsie's back as he guided her through the shadows. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the light. It was Daniel, his face twisted with rage, a gun in his hand. "You," he spat, pointing the weapon at Elsie. "You ruined everything." Albie moved to shield her, but Daniel waved the gun wildly. "Don't come closer. I swear, I'll do it." "Daniel, listen to me," Elsie said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "This doesn't have to end like this." "Shut up," he roared. "You think you can just walk away? That I'll let you take everything from me?" In the chaos, Albie lunged. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the confined space. When the dust settled, Daniel was on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Albie stood over him, his chest heaving, the weapon now in his hands. "It's over," Albie said, his voice cold. But as the authorities stormed in to apprehend Daniel, Elsie felt no relief. The weight of everything, her betrayal, her fight, her loss, crashed down on her. That night, back at Albie's penthouse, the adrenaline finally wore off. Elsie stood by the window, staring at the city lights, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Albie entered, his shirt untucked, his hair disheveled, a rare sight that made him look less like the powerful man she knew, and more like the man who had been her rock through it all. "You're not okay," he said, his voice soft. "I don't know how to be," she admitted, her voice breaking. Albie crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands gentle but firm as they cupped her face. "You've been through hell, Elsie, but you're still standing, and you're not alone." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know what I'd have done without you." "You'll never have to find out," he murmured, his voice a low promise. The air between them shifted, charged with a tension that had been building for weeks. Albie's thumb brushed away a tear, lingering against her cheek. "Albie," she whispered, her voice a plea and a warning all at once. He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough with restraint. But Elsie didn't stop him. Instead, she closed the distance, her lips finding his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then urgent, desperate, consuming. The world fell away as they gave in to the pull that had been drawing them together all along. Albie's hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer, while Elsie's fingers tangled in his hair. Their movements were slow, deliberate, each touch igniting a fire that burned away the pain and fear of the past. But just as the moment threatened to spiral out of control, Elsie pulled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "So am I," Albie admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "But I'm not letting fear stop me this time, not with you." Their lips met again, softer this time, full of unspoken promises. As the night deepened, their connection became undeniable, a moment of passion that neither could deny. But the storm outside hadn't passed, and both knew that the final reckoning with Daniel was yet to come. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Albie's penthouse, illuminating the aftermath of a sleepless night. Elsie sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the thin comfort of a silk robe, her thoughts heavy. Albie stirred behind her, his presence as steady as the warmth of the rising sun. He propped himself up on one elbow, studying her. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice husky from sleep. She glanced over her shoulder, offering a faint smile. Hard not to, considering everything. Albie moved closer, his hand brushing against her back. The touch was grounding, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. "We'll get through this," he assured her. "Daniel doesn't hold the power he thinks he does. Not anymore." "It's not just about him," Elsie admitted, her voice trembling. "It's about me, about who I let myself become when I was with him. I feel like I lost pieces of myself, and I'm scared I won't find them again." Albie reached for her, pulling her gently into his arms. "You didn't lose anything, Elsie. You're still you, strong, brilliant, and more resilient than you know. Daniel only dimmed your light. He didn't extinguish it." Her head rested against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat soothing her frayed nerves. "What if I'm too broken?" she whispered. "You're not," Albie said firmly, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. His green eyes burned with conviction. "And even if you were, I'd help you put the pieces back together, every single one." The tension between them lingered, a delicate balance between vulnerability and something far deeper. Albie's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I meant what I said last night," he murmured. "You're not alone in this." Elsie searched his face, her emotions warring within her. "Why do you care so much? You barely knew me before all this." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Maybe I saw something in you that you forgot about yourself. Or maybe—" He hesitated, his expression softening. "Maybe I needed you as much as you needed me." Her breath caught at the admission. She reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "Albie." Whatever she was about to say was lost as he closed the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and fierce, a silent declaration of everything he couldn't put into words. Time seemed to stand still as they lost themselves in each other. Albie's hands explored her back, drawing her closer, while Elsie's fingers gripped his shoulders as if anchoring herself. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered connection. No past, no future, just the present. As the hours passed, the weight of reality began to creep back in. Elsie pulled away, her forehead resting against Albie's. "We can't keep doing this," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. "Doing what?" Albie asked, his tone teasing yet serious. "Pretending like we can escape everything waiting for us out there," she said, gesturing toward the city skyline. "We're not escaping," Albie said firmly. "We're building something stronger, something that can face whatever comes next." Elsie nodded, a flicker of hope lighting her features. "Then we finish this, once and for all." Albie smiled, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You read my mind." With their resolve renewed, they set their plan into motion. Albie's team tracked Daniel's movements, uncovering his last desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling empire. "He's setting up a shell company under your name," Albie explained as they pored over the documents. "He thinks he can pin the fallout on you and disappear with the money." Elsie's anger flared, her hands clenching into fists. "Not this time. I'm done being his pawn." "Good," Albie said, his voice cold. "Because this time, we're going to destroy him." They leaked the evidence of Daniel's schemes to the press, ensuring that his crimes would be public knowledge. But it wasn't enough for Elsie. She wanted him to face her, to see the strength he had underestimated for so long. The confrontation was inevitable. It took place in the same office where Elsie had first discovered his betrayal, a fitting stage for the final act. Daniel was seated behind the desk, his smug demeanor faltering as Elsie entered, flanked by Albie. "You," Daniel sneered. "I should have known you wouldn't let this go." "You're right," Elsie said, her voice steady. "I'm not letting this go, not until you've lost everything you tried to take from me." Daniel laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think you've won? You'll never be free of me, Elsie, no matter what you do." But Elsie wasn't shaken. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You're wrong, Daniel. I'm already free, and soon you'll know what it feels like to have everything ripped away." Albie handed her a folder, a culmination of Daniel's crimes, connections, and the financial ruin he had tried to hide. Elsie placed it on the desk, watching as the color drained from his face. "It's over," she said, her voice laced with finality. Daniel's composure cracked, his mask of arrogance giving way to panic. But before he could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Elsie turned to Albie, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. It's time. The office was bathed in red and blue light as the sirens drew closer. Daniel's panic was palpable now, his hands trembling as he fumbled to shove the incriminating documents into a drawer. But it was too late. "You set me up," he hissed, glaring at Elsie. "You're not as innocent as you pretend to be, are you?" Elsie stepped closer, her expression cool and unyielding. "Innocent? Maybe I was once, but you made sure to destroy that version of me. What you didn't realize, Daniel, is that I'm stronger than you ever gave me credit for." Albie stood silently at her side, his presence a quiet but powerful reminder of the strength Elsie had found, not in revenge alone, but in reclaiming her power. "You think this will ruin me?" Daniel spat, his bravado cracking. "I'll rebuild. I'll find a way out of this." Elsie tilted her head, a cold smile curving her lips. "That's the thing about a house of cards, Daniel. It only takes one strong gust to bring it all down." The door burst open, and law enforcement officers flooded the room. Daniel's face twisted in rage as they moved to handcuff him. "You're making a mistake," he shouted, his voice rising to a near scream. "This is a setup." One of the officers glanced at Elsie, who handed over the folder with calm precision. "Everything you need is in there," she said. "Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, it's all documented." Daniel's protests grew louder as they dragged him out, his voice echoing down the hallway. "You'll regret this, Elsie. You'll see. You can't win." But for the first time in years, Elsie didn't flinch. Back in the office, the weight of the moment settled over Elsie. She leaned against the desk, the same desk where she'd first witnessed his betrayal. But now, it was no longer a symbol of her humiliation. It was a symbol of her victory. "It's done," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Albie approached, his hands slipping into his pockets as he studied her. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected, turning to face him. Albie's gaze held hers, a quiet intensity in his eyes. "What now?" he asked. Elsie took a deep breath, the air feeling lighter somehow. "Now, I rebuild, on my terms." Albie smiled faintly. "I have a feeling you'll be unstoppable." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "And you? I'll be right here," he said simply. The words carried a weight of their own, and for a moment Elsie felt the warmth of something she hadn't dared to hope for. Genuine, unselfish love. Months later, the headlines were filled with Daniel's trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and his conviction was swift. His empire crumbled, his assets seized, his name tarnished beyond repair. Elsie, on the other hand, thrived. With Albie's encouragement, she launched her own consultancy firm, quickly earning a reputation for her brilliance and integrity. But it wasn't just her career that flourished. Her relationship with Albie grew into something profound, built on trust, respect, and a shared determination to face whatever came their way. Elsie stood on the balcony of her new office, the city skyline stretching out before her. Albie joined her, a glass of wine in his hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far I've come," she admitted, "and how much farther I want to go." Albie smiled, his hand brushing against hers. "Wherever that is, you won't be going alone." She turned to him, her smile soft but certain. "I know." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elsie felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. And with it came the knowledge that she had reclaimed her life, her strength, and her future. Epilogue. A year had passed since Daniel's world crumbled. For Elsie, the days that followed had been a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece, turning every scar into a badge of honor. Now, standing at the helm of her own thriving company, she was a woman transformed, not just by revenge, but by the realization of her worth. At a lavish gala, the ballroom glittered with opulence as Elsie stepped through the grand doors, her figure draped in an elegant emerald gown that commanded attention. The event was a celebration of philanthropic achievements, hosted by none other than her company. From across the room, Albie watched her with a mix of admiration and pride. He approached, offering his hand. "Dance with me?" She smiled, placing her hand in his. "Always." As they swayed to the soft music, Elsie caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the room, Daniel. His appearance was a shadow of the man he once was, his expensive suits replaced with something ill-fitted, his confident posture reduced to a slouch. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Daniel approached cautiously, his gaze pleading. Elsie. Albie stepped forward protectively, but Elsie placed a hand on his arm, silently telling him it was okay. What do you want, Daniel? She asked, her tone neutral. He hesitated, his voice cracking. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I was a fool, and I lost the only person who ever truly cared about me. Elsie studied him, her heart surprisingly steady. I don't need your apology, Daniel. What I needed was closure, and I got that the day I walked away from you. Can we? She cut him off with a shake of her head. There's no going back. Not for us. I've moved on, and you need to find your own way forward. Daniel looked as though he might protest, but then he nodded, defeated. I hope you find happiness, Elsie. You deserve it. I already have, she said simply, turning back to Albie. As they walked away, Elsie felt no lingering bitterness or regret. She had faced her past and emerged stronger, wiser, and freer. Later that night, on the balcony overlooking the city, Albie handed her a glass of champagne. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. Elsie clinked hers against his, her smile radiant. To living unapologetically. As they stood together, the city lights stretching out before them, Elsie knew she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not revenge, but redemption. And this time, she was writing her own story. Elsie's story is a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, we have the power to rise, rebuild, and reclaim our lives. Revenge may be satisfying, but true strength lies in finding peace and purpose beyond the pain. What would you do if faced with betrayal like Elsie's? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories of resilience and redemption. Your journey to reclaiming your power starts today.